He walked into the restaurant looking like he had just been through an exhausting day. Dirty sneakers, faded old jeans, a gray hoodie pulled low over his head covering most of his face. The manager took one look at him and made a decision that would destroy everything. The man ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, $150, and paid in cash. But instead of serving him a proper meal, the manager ordered the chef to use meat from the garbage. Spoiled, contaminated, deadly dangerous. One waitress saw it all happen. She had a choice: stay silent and keep her job, or risk everything to save a stranger's life. She slipped him a note. What she did not know was that the man sitting in that corner booth was John Cena, and he owned the entire restaurant. What happened next changed both of their lives forever. Rain in Los Angeles never falls gently. It crashes down like it has something to prove, flooding the gutters and turning the sidewalks into rivers of reflected neon. It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind of night that seeps into your bones and makes you question every decision that brought you to where you are standing. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her apron, wincing as the knot dug into her lower back. She was 32 years old, a single mother raising her daughter alone since her husband walked out 4 years ago. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Sullivan's Steakhouse, she felt 50. Her feet ached in her worn orthopedic shoes, and her mind kept drifting to the stack of medical bills sitting on her kitchen counter at home. Her daughter Emma, just 8 years old, was lying in a hospital bed across town, waiting for a heart surgery that cost $85,000. The insurance covered some of it. Not nearly enough. Not even close. Sullivan's used to be the premier spot in this part of the city, a place where movie executives and talent agents came to close deals over dry, aged ribeye and expensive wines. The restaurant had history, standing here for over 40 years. But lately, something had changed. The velvet booth seats were peeling. The brass railings had lost their shine, and the spirit of the place seemed to be fading away. "Sarah, table 7 needs a refill. Stop daydreaming or I will dock your tips again." The voice grated against her ears like sandpaper. Brandon Cole. He had taken over Sullivan's 8 months ago, after the previous management company sold their stake to some anonymous investor. Nobody knew who actually owned the place now. All they knew was that Brandon treated the staff like they were disposable and the customers like inconveniences. "I am on it, Brandon," Sarah said, keeping her voice level. She could not afford to lose this job. Not now. Not with Emma's surgery scheduled for next month and no one else to help pay the bills. She grabbed the water pitcher and forced a smile onto her face as she moved through the dining room. It was mostly empty tonight. The rain had kept people home. A couple of tourists sat near the window arguing over a map. A regular named Mr. Patterson was nursing his usual scotch at the bar. It was the kind of slow night that made the minutes feel like hours. Then the heavy oak door creaked open. A gust of wind blew in, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. The man who stepped inside looked like he had been fighting the weather all day. He was tall, but he hunched his shoulders as if expecting a blow. He wore an oversized gray hoodie that was frayed at the cuffs, the hood pulled low covering most of his face. His jeans were mud, splattered, and his sneakers left wet prints on the polished floor. There was something about him that suggested he had just come from somewhere demanding. Somewhere that did not care about appearances. Perhaps a long day of physical labor, or hours spent outdoors in conditions that left no room for vanity. He stood on the welcome mat, dripping, looking around the restaurant with eyes that were startlingly sharp. A piercing deep brown that seemed to take in everything at once. Sarah paused near the service station. She saw the way Ashley, the college girl working as hostess, recoiled slightly behind her podium. Ashley glanced toward the back office, clearly praying that Brandon would not come out. But Brandon had a sixth sense for anyone he could look down upon. He emerged from the kitchen hallway and spotted the man immediately, his face twisted with contempt. He marched toward the entrance, his polished shoes clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. "Hey, hey, you." Brandon did not bother with a greeting. He planted himself in front of the stranger, blocking his path. "This is not a homeless shelter, buddy. The mission is about 6 blocks east. Turn around." The man did not flinch. He just looked at Brandon, his expression unreadable beneath the hood and the shadows. "I am not looking for a shelter," the man said. His voice was low and even, but measured, calm. "I am looking for a meal. This is a restaurant, is it not?" Brandon crossed his arms. "This is a fine dining establishment. We have standards. We have a dress code." The man looked down at his muddy sneakers, then back at Brandon. He seemed almost amused. "I have money. American currency. Last I checked, the dress code applies to the service, not to the cash paying for it." The restaurant went silent. "Mr. Patterson put down his scotch and turned to watch. The tourists stopped their argument. Everyone was looking now. Brandon's face turned a blotchy shade of red. "Look, pal, I do not want trouble. I just want you to leave before you scare off my paying customers." "I am a paying customer," the man said simply. Without waiting for permission, he stepped around Brandon and walked into the dining room. He moved with purpose, not like a man wandering, but like a man who knew exactly where he was going. He headed toward a small booth in the corner near the kitchen doors. It was not the best seat in the house. It was the kind of table you gave to people you wanted to forget about. He sat down, the wet fabric of his hoodie squelching against the leather seat, and picked up the menu. Brandon looked ready to explode. He spun around and his eyes landed on Sarah. "Sarah, get over here." "Now?" Sarah hurried over. "Yes, Brandon." Brandon grabbed her arm and pulled her closer, lowering his voice to a vicious hiss. "Go tell him we are closed. Tell him the kitchen is shut down. I do not care what you say. Just get him out of my restaurant." Sarah looked at the man in the corner booth. He was staring out the window at the rain, shivering slightly. He looked exhausted. He did not look dangerous. He looked human. "Brandon," she said carefully, "by law, we cannot refuse service just because of how someone looks. If he has money." "I do not care about the law," Brandon interrupted. "He is going to drive away everyone else. If you do not get him out of here, you can join him on the street." He leaned in closer, and his next words cut like a knife. "I know about your daughter, Sarah. I know about those hospital bills. You need this job, so do what I tell you." Sarah felt a cold spike of fear. Brandon had overheard a phone call she made in the break room weeks ago, and he had been using it against her ever since. "I will handle it," she said quietly. She walked over to the corner booth. Up close, the man looked even more worn down. Dark circles under his eyes, rough calloused hands resting on the table. But she noticed something else, too. Beneath the sleeve of his old hoodie, she caught a glimpse of a watch. It was simple, almost vintage-looking, but it was quality, the kind that cost real money. She also noticed his eyes more clearly now. They were kind. Tired, but kind. "I am sorry about the manager," Sarah said softly, placing a menu in front of him. "He is having a difficult night." The man looked up at her, and one corner of his mouth twitched upward beneath the hood. "He seems like a charming fellow," the man said with dry humor. "I am John." The name tugged at something in her memory, but she pushed the thought aside. Lots of people were named John. "Sarah," she replied, managing a small smile. "Can I get you something warm to drink? Coffee?" "Coffee. Coffee would be wonderful." "Black, please." He opened the menu and scanned the pages. Sarah watched nervously, glancing at Brandon, who was watching from the bar like a hawk. When she turned back, John's finger was on the top item of the right page. The expensive side. "I will have the ribeye," he said calmly. "The 24-ounce dry-aged, medium rare, with the truffle mashed potatoes and the grilled asparagus." Sarah froze. That was $150 for the steak alone. "Sir," she whispered, leaning in, "I have to ask. Do you have the means to pay for that? If you order it and cannot pay, My manager will call the police. He is looking for any excuse. She hesitated, then added, I can get you a burger on my tab. It is no problem. John looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. I appreciate your concern, Sarah, he said quietly. Truly, that is very kind of you. He reached into the inside pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small money clip. He peeled off 3 bills, 200s and a 50, and placed them on the table. Will this cover it? Sarah stared at the money. It was real, crisp and dry, protected from the rain by his inner pocket. Yes, she said, this will cover it. I will put this in the register now so there is no trouble. Thank you, John said. And Sarah, thank you for offering the burger. That meant more than you know. Sarah nodded and turned away. Brandon intercepted her before she could reach the register. Well, is he leaving? He ordered the ribeye, Sarah said, holding up the cash. And he paid in advance, $250. Brandon stared at the money. His jaw tightened. He could not kick out a paying customer who had already put money down. He snatched the bills from her hand and shoved them into his pocket. Fine, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Ring it in, but tell the kitchen to take their time. Let us see how long our guest enjoys waiting. He turned and marched toward the kitchen, pulling out his phone. Sarah saw his face tighten with anxiety as he glanced at the screen. Then, he stepped into the hallway to answer where no one could hear. She stood there watching him go. Something was wrong with Brandon beyond his usual cruelty. He was scared of something, or someone. But that was not her concern right now. Her concern was the man in the corner booth, trusting them to bring him a meal. He had paid good money. A man who had shown her kindness when he had no reason to. Sarah took a deep breath and walked to the register. She had no idea that the man waiting patiently in that corner booth could buy this entire restaurant and the whole block around it. She had no idea that he had once stood exactly where Sarah was standing now over 20 years ago, not as an owner, but as a broke young man asking for a dishwashing job and being turned away. And she had no idea that her simple act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. The kitchen at Sullivan's was a corridor of stainless steel and steam, smelling of garlic, seared fat, and the faint undertone of old dishwater. The walls were lined with scratched metal shelves. The floor was perpetually slick with grease, and the ventilation system groaned like it was on its last legs. But it was where the magic happened. Or at least it was where the magic used to happen. Kevin O'Brien stood at the main station, scraping down the grill with a wire brush. He was a stocky man in his late 40s, with a thick mustache and 4 arms that told the story of 30 years in professional kitchens. He had 2 kids at home, a mortgage that never seemed to shrink, and a wife who worked double shifts at a nursing home across town. Kevin was a good man. He took pride in his work. He believed that food was sacred, that every plate that left his kitchen was a promise to the person who would eat it. Tonight, that belief was about to be tested. The swing doors burst open and Brandon Cole strode in like he owned the place. He was holding the ticket that Sarah had just printed, and his face was twisted with barely contained rage. Kevin looked up from the grill. What do you need, boss? Brandon slapped the ticket down on the stainless steel counter. The ribeye, 24-ounce, medium rare. For the homeless guy out there. Kevin frowned. He had heard the commotion in the dining room. Word traveled fast in a restaurant, and by now every line cook and dishwasher knew that some poor guy who looked like he had been sleeping under a bridge had wandered in and ordered the most expensive item on the menu. He paid? Kevin asked. Brandon's eye twitched. That is not the point. If he paid, I will cook it, Kevin said simply. He turned back to the grill, reaching for his tongs. Money is money. Hold it. Brandon's voice cracked like a whip. Kevin froze. He had heard that tone before. It never meant anything good. Brandon walked slowly around the prep station, his eyes scanning the kitchen. His gaze landed on the waste area near the dishwasher station. There, sitting on a tray next to the garbage bin, was a ribeye steak that had been returned earlier that evening. A customer had complained it was overcooked, and Kevin had set it aside to be thrown out. That was over 3 hours ago. The meat had been sitting at room temperature ever since. It was starting to turn gray at the edges, and if you got close enough, you could detect a faint sour smell beginning to develop. Brandon pointed at the rejected steak. Use that one. Kevin stared at him. Excuse me? You heard me. Use the returned steak. Boss, that is garbage. Kevin's voice was tight with disbelief. It has been sitting at room temp for over 3 hours. I cannot serve that. It is a health code violation. The bacteria alone could make someone seriously ill. We are talking food poisoning. We are talking potential hospitalization. Brandon laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Look at him, Brandon said, jerking his thumb toward the dining room. He is a street rat. His stomach is probably lined with steel from eating out of dumpsters. This is 5-star dining compared to what he is used to. I am not wasting a $150 cut of prime beef on some vagrant who probably stole that cash. Kevin shook his head. No, I am not doing this. This is wrong. Brandon stepped closer. His smile disappeared, replaced by something cold. You have 2 kids, right, Kevin? Brandon's voice dropped to a near whisper. Little ones, 10 and 12. And your wife works at that nursing home on Westchester. Good jobs are hard to find in this economy, especially for people your age. Kevin felt his blood run cold. Are you threatening me? I am giving you a reality check, Brandon said. You do what I tell you, or you are out on the street by morning. And I will make sure you never work in another kitchen in Los Angeles. One phone call from me, and your career is over. Your mortgage goes unpaid. Your kids do not eat. Is that what you want? Kevin's hands were trembling. He looked at the spoiled steak, then back at Brandon. His mind was racing. He thought about his children. He thought about the bills piled up on his kitchen table. He thought about how long it had taken him to find this job. He was a good man, but he was also a desperate man. Boss, please, Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. This could kill someone. Then cook it well done. Brandon snapped. Burn it enough to hide the color. Drown it in garlic butter and chimichurri. The smell will cover everything. He will never know the difference. Brandon turned to leave, then paused at the kitchen doors. If this steak is not on a plate in 15 minutes, you are fired, and I will personally make sure your family feels every consequence. He pushed through the doors and was gone. Kevin stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the gray, slightly rancid piece of meat. His hands would not stop shaking. He had been in this industry for 3 decades. He had never been asked to do something like this. But Brandon's threats echoed in his mind. His kids, his wife, his mortgage, everything he had worked for. God forgive me, Kevin whispered. He reached for the spoiled steak. Sarah had just finished refilling Mr. Patterson's scotch when she noticed Brandon emerge from the kitchen. He was smoothing down his tie, and there was a satisfied smirk on his face that made her stomach turn. She glanced toward the corner booth. John was still sitting there, staring out the window at the rain. He had pushed back his hood slightly, revealing a head of short, cropped hair. Even from across the room, she could see that he was shivering slightly. The man was clearly exhausted. Hungry. He was trusting them to take care of him. Something felt wrong. Sarah set down the scotch bottle and walked toward the kitchen. She did not have a reason to go back there. Her tables were covered, but something was pulling her. Some instinct she could not name. She pushed through the swing doors just enough to peer inside. What she saw made her heart stop. Kevin was standing at the grill, his back to her. In his hand was a piece of meat that looked gray and discolored. He was staring at it like it was a loaded gun. And then she heard his voice, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. I am sorry. I am so sorry. He placed the steak on the grill. The sizzle that followed was sharp and immediate, but there was something else underneath it. A faint soreness in the air that did not belong. Sarah knew that smell. Every server who had worked in restaurants long enough knew that smell. It was the smell of meat that had turned. Her hand flew to her mouth. She stumbled backward, and her elbow caught the edge of a metal shelf. A pot lid clattered to the floor with a deafening crash. Kevin spun around, his eyes wide with panic. When he saw Sarah standing in the doorway, his face crumpled. "Sarah, I can explain." But before he could say another word, the doors swung open behind her. Brandon. He must have heard the noise from the hallway. He looked at Sarah, then at Kevin, then back at Sarah. His eyes narrowed. "What are you doing back here?" Sarah's mind was racing. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. "I was just checking on the order," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The customer was asking how much longer. Brandon studied her face. He was searching for something. A tell, a sign that she knew more than she was letting on. "And what did you hear?" "Nothing," Sarah said. Her voice came out too quickly. "I did not hear anything. I just knocked over the pot lid." Brandon took a step toward her. He was close now. Close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with sweat. His eyes bored into hers. "You know, Sarah," Brandon said softly, "there are things that happen in kitchens that servers do not need to know about. Things that, if spoken about, could have very serious consequences." He glanced over at Kevin, who was standing frozen at the grill, the spoiled steak sizzling behind him. "Your daughter?" Brandon continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Emma, right? She is at County General, waiting for that heart surgery, $85,000. That is a lot of money for a single mother working for tips." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I did not hear anything," she repeated. "Good," Brandon said. He smiled without warmth. "Then we understand each other. You are going to take that plate out when it is ready. And you are going to smile. And you are going to give our guest the full Sullivan's experience. And then you are going to forget this conversation ever happened." Sarah could not speak. She could only nod. "Excellent," Brandon said. He patted her on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a threat than comfort. "Now get back on the floor." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone with Kevin. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the sizzle of the steak on the grill and the hum of the refrigerators. "Kevin," Sarah finally said, her voice breaking, "you cannot do this." Kevin did not look at her. He was staring at the grill, watching the meat cook, watching the gray color slowly disappear beneath a layer of char and butter. "I have 2 kids, Sarah," he said quietly. "I have a mortgage. If I lose this job," he could not finish the sentence. Sarah looked at the steak. She looked at Kevin's shaking hands. She thought about the man sitting in the corner booth, trusting them to bring him a meal. She thought about her daughter lying in a hospital bed, waiting for a surgery that might never happen if Sarah lost her job. She thought about what Brandon had said, about consequences, about forgetting. But she also thought about something her mother once told her, about how the true measure of a person is what they do when no one is watching. Sarah wiped her eyes. She took a deep breath. "Kevin," she said quietly, "just finish cooking it. I will take care of the rest." Kevin looked at her, confusion and relief and guilt all warring on his face. He did not understand what she meant. He did not need to. Sarah turned and walked out of the kitchen. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were trembling. She had no idea what she was going to do. But she knew one thing for certain. She was not going to let that man eat poison. Sarah stood at the service station, her hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles had turned white. Through the kitchen window, she could see Kevin plating the steak. He moved mechanically, like a man in a trance. The meat was seared dark, almost charred, drowning in garlic butter and chimichurri sauce. It looked beautiful. It looked like something you would see in a food magazine. But Sarah knew what was underneath that golden crust. She knew what was hiding beneath the herbs and the butter. Poison. That plate was poison. She looked across the dining room at the corner booth. John was still sitting there, patient as a saint, flipping through an old newspaper someone had left behind. He had no idea what was coming. He had no idea that the people he had trusted with his money and his meal were about to betray him in the worst possible way. Sarah's mind was spinning. She had to warn him. But how? Brandon had cameras everywhere. He had installed them 6 months ago, claiming it was for security. But everyone knew the real reason. He wanted to watch the staff. He wanted to catch them stealing tips or taking breaks that lasted too long. The cameras recorded everything, video and audio. If she walked up to that table and told John not to eat the steak, Brandon would see it. Brandon would hear it. And then she would be fired, blacklisted, and her daughter's surgery would become nothing more than a dream that slipped away. But if she did nothing, that man would eat that meat. He would get sick. He could end up in the hospital. He could die. Sarah closed her eyes. She thought about Emma, lying in that hospital bed with tubes in her arms, waiting for a surgery that cost more money than Sarah had ever seen in her life. She thought about the stack of bills on her kitchen counter. And then she thought about the man in the corner booth. A stranger. Someone she had never met before tonight. Someone who had been kind to her when he had every reason to be suspicious. Someone who had offered her a polite smile and thanked her for offering to buy him a burger with her own money. He was a human being. He deserved better than this. Sarah opened her eyes. Her heart was pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. But her hands had stopped shaking. She knew what she had to do. She grabbed a clean white napkin from the stack next to the water glasses. She pulled a blue ballpoint pen from her apron pocket. The same pen she used to write down orders. The same pen she had used 1,000 times without thinking. This time, she thought very carefully about every word. She pressed the pen to the soft paper. The ink bled slightly, but the words were clear. "Do not eat the steak." She paused. That was not enough. He might think she was being rude. He might think the food was just bad, not dangerous. He needed to understand why. The manager made the chef use spoiled meat because of how you look. It will make you very sick. Please trust me. She hesitated again. What should he do? If he confronted Brandon, if he made a scene, Brandon would know she had warned him. She needed to give him an exit. A way out that would protect them both. Pretend to eat. Cut the meat, but do not put it in your mouth. I am so sorry. Sarah folded the napkin into a tight square and slipped it into her palm, concealing it beneath her fingers. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might faint. Order up. Kevin's voice came through the kitchen window. It was flat. Dead. He did not look at her as he slid the plate onto the pass. The steak sat there glistening under the heat lamps, looking like the finest meal in Los Angeles. Sarah walked to the window. She could feel Brandon's eyes on her from across the room. He was standing by the bar, arms crossed, watching everything. She picked up the plate. The heat radiated through the ceramic, warming her hands. She turned and walked across the dining room floor. Every step felt like walking through quicksand. The distance between the kitchen and the corner booth had never seemed so long. She reached the table. John put down his newspaper and looked at the steak. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment Sarah saw genuine appreciation on his face. "That looks incredible," he said. "My compliments to the chef." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She forced herself to smile. She set the plate down in front of him. As she adjusted the silverware, she leaned in slightly, using her body to block Brandon's line of sight from the bar. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice loud enough for Brandon to hear. "Some extra sauce, more napkins." As she spoke, her hand moved beneath the table. With a sleight of hand she had learned from years of hiding tips from greedy shift supervisors, she pressed the folded napkin into John's rough palm. She squeezed his hand once. Hard. A signal. John froze. He looked up at her, startled. Sarah held his gaze for just a moment. She did not speak. She could not speak, but her eyes said everything. "Read it, please. Trust me." She pulled her hand back and straightened up. "Enjoy your meal, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. She turned and walked away without looking back. She could feel Brandon watching her. She forced herself to move normally, to breathe normally, to act like nothing had happened. She reached the service station and grabbed a clean glass, pretending to polish it. Her hands were trembling again. She angled herself so she could see the corner booth in the mirror behind the bar. John was sitting very still. The steam was rising from the poisoned steak in front of him. He looked at the plate, then down at his hand beneath the table. Slowly, carefully, he unfolded the napkin. Sarah watched in the reflection as his eyes moved across the words she had written. She saw the moment he understood. It was like watching a transformation. The tired, slump-shouldered man who had walked in from the rain disappeared. His spine straightened. His jaw tightened. His eyes, those kind brown eyes that had seemed so wary just moments ago, turned cold and sharp as steel. He looked at the steak. He looked toward the kitchen. And then he looked directly at Sarah's reflection in the mirror. Their eyes met. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding. John picked up his knife and fork. Sarah's heart stopped. What was he doing? Had he not believed her? He sliced into the meat. The knife cut through easily, revealing the grayish interior that the char had hidden. He speared a piece on his fork. He lifted it toward his mouth. Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to run across the room and knock the fork out of his hand. But John stopped. The fork hovered inches from his lips. He held it there for a long moment, as if considering. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered the fork and rested it on the edge of the plate. He picked up his coffee cup instead and took a long sip. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. A phone. But not just any phone. It was a brand new smartphone, sleek and expensive, the kind that cost more than Sarah made in a month. It looked completely out of place in the hands of a man who appeared to be homeless. Brandon noticed it too. From across the room, Sarah saw Brandon's expression change. Confusion. Suspicion. He uncrossed his arms and started walking toward the corner booth. John was already dialing. He put the phone to his ear, his eyes fixed on Brandon as the manager approached. "Hey," Brandon barked, arriving at the table. "No phones on speaker. This is a classy establishment. And where did you get that?" John ignored him completely. He spoke into the phone, his voice low but clear. "David, I am at Sullivan's, the one on Vine Street. I know you are at the hotel nearby. Get here now. Bring the lawyer, and call the health department." He hung up and set the phone on the table next to the untouched steak. Brandon stared at the phone, then at John. His face was cycling through emotions. Confusion, anger, the first flickers of fear. "Who the hell are you?" Brandon demanded. "Who are you talking to?" John did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached up and pulled back the hood that had been covering his head. He ran a hand through his short, cropped hair, pushing it back from his face. The hoodie had hidden his build. But now, as he sat up straight, his shoulders squared, the sheer size of him became apparent. Massive shoulders, thick neck, the physique of someone who had spent decades training their body to perfection. Brandon's face went pale. And as the hood came down fully, as the man's face became visible in the warm light of the restaurant, Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She knew that face. Everyone in America knew that face. It had been on wrestling rings and movie posters for over 2 decades. It belonged to one of the most famous entertainers in the world. A man known not just for his championships, but for his kindness, his charity work, his record-breaking dedication to sick children through Make-A-Wish. Brandon recognized him too. The color drained from his face completely. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You are? John Cena stood up from the booth. He rose to his full height, no longer hunching, no longer pretending. He looked at Brandon with an expression that was calm but cold. Yes, John said quietly. I am. And I am also the person who bought this restaurant 18 months ago. The anonymous investor your company reports to. That is me? The words landed like a bomb in the middle of the dining room. The tourists stopped talking. Mr. Patterson nearly dropped his scotch. Ashley, the hostess, covered her mouth with both hands. Brandon stumbled backward, knocking into an empty chair. That is impossible, he stammered. The owner is some corporation. Nobody knows who. His voice trailed off as the truth settled over him. In the year 2000, John said, his voice steady, I came to California with $500 in my pocket. I slept in my car, a 1991 Lincoln Continental. During the day, I worked at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, cleaning toilets, folding towels. At night, I came to this restaurant and asked for a dishwashing job. They turned me away because I looked too much like a drifter. He paused, letting the words sink in. But there was a woman here. A manager named Martha. She slipped me a free meal and told me not to give up. I never forgot that kindness. When I finally had money, I bought this restaurant to preserve it, to protect it. His eyes locked onto Brandon. And tonight, I came to see how my investment was being managed. I wanted to see how the staff treats people when they think no one important is watching. Brandon was shaking now. Sweat was beading on his forehead. Mr. he said, his voice cracking. Sir, please. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Save it, John said, cutting him off. We will talk when my lawyer gets here. As if on cue, the front door of the restaurant opened. Two men in expensive suits walked in, their faces grim and professional. Behind them came a third man carrying a silver case. Sarah stood frozen at the service station, watching everything unfold. The man she had risked everything to save was John Cena, and her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. The first man, tall with graying hair, walked directly to John. We came as fast as we could. We were just finishing dinner at the hotel down the street. Thank you, David, John said. He gestured toward the plate of untouched steak. I need that tested. And I need statements from everyone who works here tonight. David nodded and signaled to the man with the silver case. The specialist moved toward the table with clinical precision, opening his case to reveal an array of testing equipment. Swabs, vials, electronic devices that looked like they belonged in a hospital laboratory. Brandon looked at the suited men. He looked at John. He looked at the plate of poisoned steak sitting on the table. And for the first time all night, the bully who had terrorized everyone in this restaurant realized that the tables had completely turned. Everyone watched in tense silence as the specialist cut a small sample from the center of the meat. Even from several feet away, Sarah could see what the char and the butter had been hiding. The interior of the steak was gray, almost greenish in places. It did not look like food. It looked like something that should have been thrown away hours ago. Which, of course, it should have been. The specialist ran several tests. He swabbed the meat. He checked temperatures. He examined the sample under a small portable microscope. The whole process took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Finally, he looked up at John. Significant bacterial contamination, the specialist reported, his voice clinical and precise. The meat has been at room temperature for at least 3 hours, possibly longer. Staphylococcus aureus is present at dangerous levels. If consumed, this would have caused severe food poisoning at minimum. Hospitalization would have been likely. In someone with a compromised immune system, it could have been fatal. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. John nodded slowly. He turned to look at Brandon, who was standing near the bar, flanked by the second suited man who had positioned himself to prevent any attempt at escape. Brandon's face had gone from pale to ashen. Sweat was dripping down his temples. His expensive tie was askew, and his hands were trembling at his sides. "Mr. Cena," Brandon said, his voice cracking. "Sir, please, you have to understand. This was not my idea. It was the chef. Kevin. He is the one who cooked it. He is the one who put that meat on the grill. I had nothing to do with it." John said nothing. He simply looked at Brandon with those calm, cold eyes. "And the waitress?" Brandon continued, desperation creeping into his voice. "Sarah. She is the one who served it. She brought that plate to your table. She knew what was on it. They are working together. They have been trying to sabotage this restaurant for months. They are trying to frame me." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but before she could speak, a voice came from the kitchen doorway. "That is a lie." Everyone turned. Kevin O'Brien was standing there, still in his chef's whites, his face pale but determined. He stepped into the dining room, his hands clenched at his sides. "I cooked that steak," Kevin said, his voice shaking but clear. "I did it because Brandon ordered me to. He threatened my job. He threatened my family. He told me if I did not use that spoiled meat, he would make sure I never worked in another kitchen again." Kevin looked at Sarah, then at John. "Sarah had nothing to do with it." Kevin continued. "She tried to stop me. She begged me not to do it. And then she warned you. She risked everything to warn you. If anyone is innocent in this room, it is her." Brandon's face contorted with rage. "You are lying," he screamed. "You are both lying. This is a conspiracy. You are all against me." John held up his hand and the room fell silent. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a crumpled piece of white paper. The napkin. Sarah's napkin. The one she had pressed into his hand less than an hour ago. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases, and held it up so everyone could see the blue ink. The desperate handwriting. "Do not eat the steak," John read aloud. "The manager made the chef use spoiled meat because of how you look. It will make you very sick. Please trust me." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Pretend to eat. Cut the meat, but do not put it in your mouth. I am so sorry." John lowered the napkin and looked at Brandon. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward Sarah. "This waitress who earns minimum wage plus tips, who is a single mother with a daughter waiting for heart surgery, who cannot afford to lose her job for even one day. She risked everything to warn a complete stranger." He took a step toward Brandon. "She did not know who I was. She did not know I owned this restaurant. She did not know I could help her or hurt her. All she knew was that a man was about to be poisoned, and she could not let that happen." His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of emotion that made it even more powerful. She saw a human being, not a homeless person, not a vagrant, not someone disposable. She saw a human being who deserved to be treated with dignity. And she acted on that belief, even when it could have cost her everything. John turned back to Brandon. "And you? What did you see when I walked through that door tonight?" Brandon said nothing. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "You saw someone you could abuse," John continued. "Someone you could humiliate. Someone you could poison without consequence, because you believed no one would care. You looked at my clothes, at my appearance, and you decided I was worthless. You decided my life did not matter." He shook his head slowly. "That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Brandon suddenly dropped to his knees. The movement was so abrupt that everyone in the room jumped. He clasped his hands together in front of him like a man praying. "Please," Brandon begged, tears streaming down his face. "Please, Mr. Cena. I am sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I was desperate. I have debts. People I owe money to. Bad people. They have been threatening me for months. I was not thinking clearly. I will change. I swear to God, I will change. Just give me another chance." John looked down at the man kneeling before him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet but firm. You know what I have learned in my life, Brandon? Regret that comes only when you are caught is not real regret. It is just fear of consequences. Real change, real remorse. That comes from inside. It comes before you get caught. It comes when you look in the mirror and cannot stand what you see. He paused. You are not sorry for what you did. You are sorry that it did not work. Brandon's sobs grew louder. Please, I am begging you. Do not call the police. Do not ruin my life. John was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to David. Do not call the police, he said. Brandon's head snapped up, hope flickering in his tear-filled eyes. But John was not finished. I am not going to call the police tonight, Brandon. Instead, I am going to give you a choice. The kind of choice you did not give me when you decided to poison my food. He crouched down so he was eye level with the kneeling man. Option 1. You turn yourself in to the authorities tomorrow morning. You confess to what you did tonight. You confess to the money you have been stealing from this restaurant for the past 8 months. Yes, I know about that too. My accountants found the discrepancies weeks ago. That is part of why I came here tonight. Brandon's face went even paler, if that was possible. You come clean about everything, John continued. You accept the consequences. You face the legal system like a man, and maybe, you come out the other side as a better person. He stood up. Option 2. You walk out that door right now. You disappear. But know this. By tomorrow morning, everyone in the restaurant industry in Los Angeles will know what you did here tonight. Every chef, every manager, every owner. You will never work in hospitality again. Not in this city. Not anywhere. He took a step back. And those people you owe money to, the bad people you mentioned. When they find out you have lost your job, that you have no income, that you have no way to pay them back, they will come looking for you. And I will not be there to protect you. John's eyes bore into Brandon. The choice is yours, Brandon. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Brandon remained on his knees for a long moment. The restaurant was completely silent. Everyone was watching, waiting. Then, slowly, Brandon rose to his feet. He looked at John. He looked at Sarah. He looked at Kevin. His face cycled through a dozen emotions. Shame, anger, desperation. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the front door. David's associate stepped aside to let him pass. Brandon pushed through the door and disappeared into the night. No one moved. John watched the door for a moment, then turned to David. Have someone follow him, he said quietly. Make sure he does not do anything stupid, and start preparing the paperwork for the police. I have a feeling he will not choose option 1. David nodded and stepped away to make a phone call. John turned to the remaining staff. Kevin was still standing near the kitchen doorway. Ashley, the hostess, was clutching the podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Mr. Patterson had finally put down his scotch and was watching with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something he would never forget. And Sarah. Sarah was standing by the service station, tears streaming silently down her face. John walked over to her. Sarah, he said gently, are you all right? She tried to speak, but no words would come. She just shook her head, overwhelmed. John reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. You did something extraordinary tonight, he said. You showed me that kindness still exists in this world. That integrity still matters. That there are still people who will do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I have granted over 650 wishes for children with critical illnesses through Make-A-Wish. I have met kids who were dying, who had every reason to be bitter and angry at the world. But instead, they smiled. They laughed. They taught me what real strength looks like. He looked around the restaurant, at the faded grandeur, at the history embedded in every wall. Real strength is not about muscles or championships or how much money you have. Real strength is choosing to do the right thing when no one is watching. Real strength is a waitress who risks her job to save a stranger's life with nothing but a napkin and a pen. Sarah finally found her voice. "I did not know who you were," she whispered. "I just knew I could not let you get hurt." "I know," John said. "That is what made it real." John turned to address everyone in the room. "I want all of you to know that your jobs are safe. Brandon is gone, and he is never coming back. Tomorrow, we will begin the process of rebuilding this place. Not just the physical space, but the culture, the way people are treated here, both staff and customers." He looked at Kevin. "Kevin, I know Brandon threatened you. I know you felt you had no choice, but you did have a choice, and in the end, you made the right one by telling the truth. That counts for something." Kevin nodded, relief and shame warring on his face. "Thank you, sir. I will never let anything like this happen again. I swear it." John turned back to Sarah. "A's for you," he said. "I have something I would like to discuss with you. But not tonight. Tonight has been long enough for everyone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was simple, elegant. Just a name and a phone number. "Call this number tomorrow afternoon," he said, pressing the card into her hand. "We have a lot to talk about." He paused, and his next words made Sarah's breath catch. And Sarah, "Bring your daughter's medical records." Sarah stared at the card, then at John. She did not understand what he meant, but something in his eyes told her that her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. The night ended quietly. The staff cleaned up. The doors were locked. The lights were dimmed. And somewhere in the darkness of Los Angeles, Brandon Cole was running from the consequences of his choices, not knowing that the real reckoning was only just beginning. 3 days later, exactly as John had predicted, Brandon did not turn himself in. Instead, news began to spread through the restaurant industry like wildfire. Former employees came forward with stories of abuse, of stolen tips, of unsafe practices. The health department launched an investigation. The police opened a case file. And the people Brandon owed money to, the dangerous people with dangerous debts, they came looking for the man who had promised to pay them back and now had nothing to offer. Brandon Cole disappeared from Los Angeles. Some said he fled to Mexico. Others said he was hiding somewhere in the desert. No one knew for sure. But everyone knew one thing. You cannot outrun the consequences of your choices. Sooner or later, what you put into the world comes back to you. That is not poetry. That is just the way life works. The afternoon after that terrible night, Sarah sat in a quiet office on the 15th floor of a building in downtown Los Angeles. The view through the window stretched all the way to the ocean, but she barely noticed it. Her hands were trembling as she clutched a manila folder containing Emma's medical records. She had not slept. She had spent the entire night replaying everything that had happened, convinced that she would wake up and discover it had all been a dream. But it was not a dream. The door opened, and John Cena walked in. He was dressed differently today. Simple jeans and a plain black shirt. No hoodie, no disguise, just himself. He sat down across from her and smiled. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I still do not understand what is happening." John leaned back in his chair. "I will explain everything. But first, I want to tell you a story." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I was 23 years old, I had nothing. I came to California with $500 and a dream of becoming a professional wrestler. I slept in my car for months. I worked at a gym during the day, cleaning equipment and folding towels. At night, I trained at a small wrestling school that let me pay in installments because I could not afford the full tuition." He looked out the window. "There were so many times I wanted to give up. So many nights when I wondered if I was fooling myself, If I should just go back to Massachusetts and get a real job. Forget about this stupid dream. He turned back to Sarah. But then something would happen. A small kindness from a stranger. Someone believing in me when I did not believe in myself. A free meal when I was hungry. An encouraging word when I was ready to quit. Those moments kept me going. They reminded me that the world was not as cold as it sometimes seemed. He leaned forward. That is why I do what I do with Make-A-Wish. I have granted over 650 wishes now, more than any other celebrity in history. Do you know why? Sarah shook her head. Because I remember what it felt like to be invisible, to be struggling, to be one small kindness away from giving up completely. Those children, the ones who are sick, the ones who are dying, they deserve to know that someone sees them, that someone cares, that their lives matter. He reached across the table and gently took Sarah's hand. What you did for me that night. You did not know I was John Cena. You did not know I was rich or famous, or that I owned that restaurant. All you saw was a man who looked tired and hungry, and was about to be poisoned, and you risked everything to save him. His eyes glistened. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? In a world where most people look away, where most people choose their own comfort over someone else's life, you chose differently. You chose to be kind when cruelty would have been so much easier. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. She did not bother to wipe them away. I just did what anyone would do, she said. No, John said firmly. That is not true. Most people would not have done what you did. Kevin did not do it at first. Brandon certainly did not do it. The other staff members did not do it. You were the only one who saw me as a human being worth saving. He squeezed her hand. And now I want to return the favor. He released her hand and opened a folder that had been sitting on the table. I have spoken with my team, with my lawyers, with my accountants, and I have made some decisions. He pulled out a document and slid it across the table. First, Emma's surgery. The full cost, $85,000. It will be paid in full by the end of the week. You will not owe a single penny. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. A sob escaped her lips. Second, John continued, I am creating a foundation. I am calling it the Blue Napkin Foundation, named after the napkin that saved my life. Its mission will be to help families who are struggling with medical expenses for their children. And I want you to help me run it. Sarah stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. Third, John pulled out another document. Sullivan's Steakhouse needs a new general manager. Someone with integrity. Someone who understands that how you treat people matters more than how much money they have. Someone who will never let what happened to me happen to anyone else. He slid the document toward her. I want that person to be you. Sarah looked at the paper. The words blurred through her tears. Mr. Cena, I cannot do this. I cannot run a restaurant. I do not have a degree. I do not know how to manage a business. I am just a waitress. John shook his head. You are not just anything, Sarah. You are a woman who risked her daughter's surgery, her job, her entire future, to save a stranger with nothing but a napkin and a pen. That is not just. That is extraordinary. He leaned forward. I will provide training. I will provide support. My team will teach you everything you need to know about running a restaurant. The spreadsheets, the inventory, the management systems. Those things can be learned. He pointed at her heart. But what you have in here, the courage, the compassion, the integrity, those things cannot be taught. Those things are who you are. And those are the things that matter. Sarah was shaking. Her entire body trembled with the weight of what was being offered. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing all of this for me? John smiled. Because my mother once told me something that I have never forgotten. She said that the true measure of a person is not what they do when everyone is watching. It is what they do when no one is watching. When there is no reward. When there is no recognition. When the only thing driving them is the knowledge that it is the right thing to do. He stood up, and walked to the window, looking out at the vast city below. I have had a lot of success in my life. Championships, movies, fame, fortune. But none of that means anything compared to the moments when I get to help someone who truly deserves it. He turned back to face her. You deserve this, Sarah. Not because I am being generous, not because I feel sorry for you, but because you earned it. You proved who you are when everything was on the line. You wrote your character on that napkin in blue ink, and it was the most beautiful thing I have read in years. Sarah wiped her eyes. She looked at the documents on the table. She thought about Emma, lying in that hospital bed. She thought about the surgery that had seemed impossible just days ago. She thought about her mother's words, about doing the right thing when no one is watching. Okay, she said, her voice barely audible. What was that? John asked. Sarah took a deep breath. She squared her shoulders. She looked John Cena directly in the eyes. Okay, she said again, stronger this time. I will do it. I will learn everything I need to learn. I will run that restaurant. I will help you build that foundation. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me was not misplaced. John smiled. It was the biggest smile she had seen from him since they met. I know you will, he said. I never had any doubt. He extended his hand. Sarah took it. And in that moment, with a handshake in a quiet office overlooking the city, both of their lives changed forever. 2 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell stood in front of the full-length mirror in the back office of Sullivan's Steakhouse, adjusting the collar of her new black blazer. It was not from Goodwill this time. It was tailored, fitted perfectly to her shoulders, made from fabric that felt like nothing she had ever worn before. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger, a confident stranger, a stranger who belonged here. The office itself was unrecognizable. Gone was the stale smell of Brandon's cheap cologne. Gone were the cluttered papers and the grimy filing cabinets. In their place was a clean, organized workspace with fresh paint on the walls and a small vase of flowers on the desk. Her desk now. General Manager. The words still felt surreal every time she thought about them. The renovation had been swift and thorough. John had brought in a team of designers and contractors who worked around the clock. The old peeling velvet booths had been replaced with rich burgundy leather. The tarnished brass had been polished until it gleamed. The kitchen had been completely overhauled with new equipment and new safety protocols that Kevin O'Brien had helped design. Kevin was still here. John had kept him on as head chef, on strict probation. Kevin had accepted the terms without complaint. In fact, he had thrown himself into the work with a dedication that surprised everyone. He arrived before dawn every morning to inspect the deliveries. He trained the line cooks personally. He tasted every sauce, checked every cut of meat, and refused to let anything leave his kitchen that was not perfect. He was trying to redeem himself. Sarah understood that. She understood the weight of guilt, and she understood the power of a second chance. Emma's surgery had happened 5 days ago. It had been successful. The doctors said she would make a full recovery. She was still in the hospital, resting and growing stronger every day, but the fear that had hung over Sarah's life for so long was finally lifting. Her daughter was going to be okay. Sarah wiped a tear from her eye and took a deep breath. Tonight was not about the past. Tonight was about the future. She walked out of the office and into the dining room. The restaurant was transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the tables. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. The staff, dressed in crisp new uniforms, moved through the space with nervous energy, making final preparations. Ashley was at the hostess stand, looking more confident than Sarah had ever seen her. Mr. Patterson was already seated at his usual spot at the bar, nursing his first scotch of the evening and watching the preparations with an amused smile. "You clean up nice, boss," he said when Sarah walked by. Sarah laughed. It was the first real laugh she had allowed herself in weeks. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson. You are looking pretty sharp yourself. The old man winked. Would not miss this for the world. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doors opened. The first wave of guests arrived. Word had spread about the incident, though the details had been kept vague to protect everyone involved. What people knew was that Sullivan's had new management, a renovated space, and the backing of a famous and famously generous celebrity. The curiosity factor alone had filled the reservation book for months. Sarah moved through the dining room like she had been doing it her whole life. She greeted guests. She checked on tables. She coordinated with the kitchen. She solved problems before they became crises. Every lesson she had learned in 10 years of waitressing came flooding back, amplified by a new confidence she had not known she possessed. The kitchen was running smoothly. Kevin was in his element, calling out orders and conducting his team like an orchestra. The food that emerged from that kitchen was the best Sullivan's had ever produced. Every plate was a work of art. Every bite was perfection. By 9 o'clock, the restaurant was full. The noise level was a happy roar of conversation and laughter and clinking glasses. Sarah paused near the service station and allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had done it. They had all done it. That was when she noticed him. A man had just walked in through the front door. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt pulled low over his face, and he was carrying a large plastic container tucked under his arm. He did not approach the hostess stand. He did not look around for a table. Instead, he stood just inside the entrance, scanning the room with quick, nervous eyes. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She recognized that look. It was the look of someone who did not belong. Someone who was not here for the food. She moved toward him slowly, keeping her expression calm. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help you?" The man flinched when she spoke. His eyes darted to her face, then away. He clutched the container tighter. "I am looking for Brandon," he said. His voice was rough, agitated. "Brandon Cole. He owes me money. A lot of money. He said he worked here." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Mr. Cole no longer works at this restaurant. He left several weeks ago." The man's face twisted with anger. "Left? You mean he ran? And left me holding the bag? Do you know what happens when someone does that to the people I work for?" "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave." The man laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Oh, I am leaving. But first, I am going to make sure this place never opens again. If Brandon cannot pay what he owes, then everything he touched is going to suffer." He lifted the plastic container. Through the semi-transparent lid, Sarah could see movement. Hundreds of tiny dark shapes crawling over each other. Cockroaches. The container was full of cockroaches. Sarah's blood ran cold. If those insects were released in the middle of the dining room, it would be a disaster. Health code violations. Lawsuits. Headlines. The restaurant would never recover. Everything they had worked for would be destroyed. The man's hand moved toward the lid. Sarah did not think. She acted. She stepped forward, placing herself directly in front of him, blocking his path into the dining room. At the same time, she caught Ashley's eye and gave a subtle nod toward the back, where the security team John had hired was stationed. "Sir," she said, her voice low but firm, "I understand you are upset. I understand someone wronged you. But the people in this restaurant tonight, the staff, the guests, they had nothing to do with what Brandon did to you. They are innocent. Punishing them will not get you your money back. It will only create more victims." The man hesitated. His hand was still on the container lid, but he had not opened it yet. Sarah pressed on. "Brandon made his choices. He is facing the consequences of those choices right now, wherever he is. But you still have a choice. You can walk out that door right now, and no one has to know you were here. Or you can do something that will ruin lives, including your own. Because I promise you, if you release those insects, you will be arrested before you make it to the street." She held his gaze, refusing to look away. "Is that really what you want? To destroy your own life because of someone else's mistakes?" For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The man stared at her. Sarah stared back. The noise of the restaurant continued around them, oblivious to the crisis unfolding at the entrance. Then, slowly, the man lowered the container. He looked at Sarah with an expression she could not quite read. Confusion, maybe. Or something like respect. "You have got guts. Lady," he muttered. Before Sarah could respond, two members of the security team appeared on either side of him. They escorted him out quickly and quietly, the container still sealed, the crisis averted. Most of the guests had not even noticed anything was wrong. Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking. But she had done it. She had protected this place. Again, that was impressive. She turned around. John Cena was standing a few feet away, watching her with a small smile on his face. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, a far cry from the battered hoodie he had worn the night they met. He looked every inch the celebrity he was, but his eyes were the same. Kind, warm, real. "Mr. Cena?" Sarah said, startled. "I did not know you were here. I came in through the back," John said. "I wanted to see how things were going without making a fuss." He gestured toward the door where the man had been escorted out. "How did you know what to do?" Sarah shook her head. "I did not know. I just saw someone in pain. Someone who was about to make a terrible decision. I thought maybe if I talked to him, if I reminded him that he still had a choice." She trailed off, not sure how to finish. John nodded slowly. "You know, there is a saying I heard once. The hardest part of working in a place like this is not the food or the customers or the long hours. The hardest part is protecting the sanctuary. People come to restaurants to escape the storms in their lives. It is our job to keep those storms outside." He looked around the bustling dining room, at the happy faces, at the full tables, at the warm light reflecting off the polished brass. "You kept the storm out tonight, Sarah. For the second time, this place is lucky to have you." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for believing in me, for Emma's surgery, for all of it." John shook his head gently. "You do not need to thank me, Sarah. You created this yourself. All I did was open a door. You are the one who walked through it." He paused and smiled. "Now, I believe my usual table is waiting. The corner booth. I would like to order dinner, if that is possible. I hear the ribeye here is exceptional." Sarah laughed, and this time, the laugh came easily. "Right this way, Mr. Cena." She led him through the dining room to the corner booth. The same booth where everything had changed 2 weeks ago. The same booth where a stranger in a hoodie had been given a choice between poison and kindness. As John settled into his seat, Sarah handed him a menu. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide?" "Coffee," John said. "Black." Sarah smiled. She remembered. "Of course." She turned to walk away, but John's voice stopped her. "Sarah, one more thing." She turned back. John reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a picture frame, simple and elegant. Inside the frame was a piece of paper. A napkin. A crumpled white napkin with blue ink bleeding through it. The words still visible after all this time. "Do not eat the steak. I am having this framed for the restaurant," John said. "I want it hung near the entrance, where everyone can see it. Not because of what it says, but because of what it represents." He looked up at her, and his eyes were bright with emotion. "It represents the moment when someone chose kindness over fear. When someone decided that a stranger's life was worth more than their own security. That is the spirit I want this restaurant to embody. That is the legacy I want to build here." Sarah stared at the napkin. At the desperate words she had scrawled in a moment of terror and hope. She had never imagined those words would become something more. A symbol, a reminder, a legacy. John raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "Thank you, Sarah, for reminding me that goodness still exists in this world, for showing me that one small act of courage can change everything." Sarah raised her hand slightly, returning the gesture. Thank you, Mr. Cena, for giving me a second chance. John shook his head, that familiar gentle smile on his face. You did not need a second chance, Sarah. You created your own. With nothing but a napkin and a pen, you changed both of our lives. He took a sip of his coffee. Now go run your restaurant, general manager. You have guests to take care of. Sarah nodded. She turned and walked back into the bustling dining room. Her dining room. Ready to face whatever came next. Outside, the Los Angeles night was clear and calm. The storms had passed, and inside Sullivan's Steakhouse, the warm light glowed through the windows, welcoming everyone who needed a place to belong. Sometimes the things that change our lives are not grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes they are small choices. A decision to be kind when cruelty would have been easier. A willingness to risk everything for a stranger. A few words scrawled on a napkin that say simply, I see you. You matter. Sarah Mitchell had learned that lesson in the hardest possible way. And now, standing in the restaurant, she helped save. Watching the guests enjoy their meals, watching Kevin create masterpieces in the kitchen, watching John Cena eat his steak in the corner booth with a contented smile, she understood something profound. Kindness is not weakness. Compassion is not naive. And doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is never, ever a mistake. Because in the end, we do not rise by pushing others down. We rise by lifting each other up. And the legacy we leave behind is not measured in dollars or fame or power. It is measured in the lives we touch, the hearts we heal, and the moments when we choose to be brave. Sarah had made that choice on a rainy Tuesday night with nothing but a blue pen and a desperate hope, and it had changed everything. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.